What an absurdly strange cloud. Just absolutely surreal. I took this picture earlier today, and it just was so strange to look at it. It got me to thinking about weather modification and magic and the normal tangents my mind goes on. But it brought me back here to speak about language as a tool, as an architected system, how it encourages and defines culture, how it is clunky and can never really serve the purpose that it was made for, what it is as a tool to storytell, to make generations. Language, it's such a funny thing, isn't it? The types of noises and sounds that come out of our mouths, and we have these certain codexes, these certain practices, scripts even. It's the easiest way of putting it, as if the way people talk, it's a coding. A friend of mine always often comments on how effortlessly I code switch in different environments. Yet there's this, the underpinnings of that have nothing to do with me knowing all of these other codes within an environment. Because truly, when you look at culture, the underpinning, what's behind the language is an energetic force. It's what the person is saying before, their energy, what the community, what the environment dictates. And then what happens as we get out of what we'd see as tribal units and the more ancient languages, and what we see as the way people, the way people speak. The way people speak actually influences architecture. No one's building a high rise using a different language, a more primordial language. There's a lot of reasons for this. There's an organic way of speaking. There's an organic voice. And I always like to bring people's mind to this place where you consider what would your thoughts be if you didn't have language to associate things with. If you didn't have these set of tones and vibrations and words, and I say words and you're thinking of the individual pictures that might come into your head, or an action or something that's occurring because of what I speak. But what if you don't have these words? Starting there, it's always but how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's your experience? But even in that, the question is formed, and I use this language this way to ask that question. But what's underneath all of that? What's underneath the prepackaged cultural operating system, the mechanisms of language? Language has served as a in one way, I've explained it to people often like this, that it delivers generations without language, without these stories. Just like in Dr. Parnassus, they talk about the storytelling, the world wouldn't exist. And then the devil comes and makes these monks stop telling stories, but points out that the world still exists. And what's really being examined here is the next generation. The only way you can know about your ancestors is through language, or else they don't exist. How they can't. So in one way, it is this really, it's a very proficient tool. It's efficient at doing something to prescribe a reality and to inject some sort of linear path. It gives you a sequencing device to recognize your past and a future and ideas. But at the same time, language is void. It's very void of the fundamental thing that is humanness, which seems to be the most primordial thing. Is how are you feeling? What is that? Looking at someone and a feeling that you get, a hug, a whatever it is that feeling is, that's the necessary point that people, the immediacy of any situation that people need to start from. And this idea of, as we start telling stories to ourselves and generating the next paragraph, the next sentence, the next scripting. So many people are repeating scripts. It's like what happens in sales. You become a salesman and you repeat a script because it gets you a result, which rewards you with a currency, obviously artificial, but what we see underneath that, I do wonder. I wonder at the idea of not being given a language to begin with, because the outpouring of the language then gives you all of these books that oftentimes turn into, more than not, turn into constraints, turns into the opposite of anarchy. And anarchy is not what people think of. It's not what a messy A within a circle and robbing and pillaging and throwing caution to the wind and destruction and terror and violence, and that's not what anarchy is at all. But we take these, in fact, those things are actually, those things I just spoke of are the results of language, of constriction, of definition, of, look at how many books are out there, look at the legalese, look at the all of the codes and jurisdictions and laws and all of these type of things they're all man-made constructs, and it all comes out of the use of language and how cumbersome it is. It's a backpack that's way too big for anyone to carry. It doesn't, you could have immense control and knowledge of all of the words in the language, but it can be more troublesome than it's worth. There's always a question people ask about, if you could know every language on the face of the earth and be able to speak them perfectly, or would you rather be able to play all the instruments perfectly? They both have their merits, but it's a very interesting question for people. For me, it gets back to when you listen to music, we listen to someone sing, but they're singing out of their language, which already has altered the organic. When I say organic, the rawness, the feral, you'd have to get into the type of, like, even yodeling, a more primal source of what are these sounds. What we had these sounds that spoke just as all of the other creatures do. They don't have a written language, yet they all know what they're talking about. They all know what they're speaking. They know what they're saying. It's in symbols, and we've actually taken all of these organic, simple symbols and structures and tried to refine them, constrain them, contain them, and turn them into ways of profiting and controlling. And so we use these. We've taken these sounds and reverberations from, as some people, most people. This gets into where people talk from. When people are speaking from their mind, their voice sounds different. When they're speaking from a different part of their being, their voice sounds different. And when we connect this to having to use words, like if I'm speaking, they say speak from the heart or speak from the lower realms of yourself. Speak very conscious and very heady. It's an interesting place, that meeting in the middle, which is your mouth, of high forms of thought and spiritual nature, and then somehow taking that and referencing it immediately with all of these possible scenarios of letters that turn into words, that turn into these symbols and images. And it's a two-way street of trying to source an image and find that word, and being an architect of language, and also be somewhat poetic. Some people attempt to be, and then taking all of that and also combining it with what is your being, what you're coming from a deeper place. But not a lot of people have the capacity to do that. They don't have the time. They don't have the space. And even if they did have the time and space, do they have anything to add? Do they have anything important to add? Rather than this redundancy. So we look at a language like English and see these symbols, and as I've often spoke about, understanding that each one of the symbols and letters is unto itself a being, a sound. It has a purpose. It's not making. I've gotten to this before, and it's understanding the individual expression of each letter is of extreme importance, but it's not taught. We're taught that letters in English really don't have any value. The word has value, but we don't see that the word is made up of these letters. We just see them as somehow just filling up space so that we may capture that image of BIKE. Oh, that's a bicycle. Now I can see it. So it's a bike. It's not a letter B and an I and a K and an E to anyone. but those truly are what makes up the framework for our reality, each one of those individual letters. And that is one of the biggest form of control and manipulation, and what the matrix actually is. The matrix is a coding system of language. Because without it, what would you see? What would our environment look like? How could we the way things would be built would be different. It's interesting that a blueprint and a drawing of something, there's no language in there, but something could be accomplished. This is why you have people that are doing jobs that don't speak the same language, but a blueprint can do something. It can speak volumes. This is why, taking a picture is worth 1,000 words, or an artist that uses a whole palette of colors and space and texture, and there's a lot in there, and because it comes back to the primary source of all information, which is image. Image is everything. The image, which produces, then comes to language. Like it's a secondary force. It's a secondary thing that only hopes to explain the unexplainable. The two things that exist are images and the feeling. That's the two things. Everything beyond that is a reduction. It's a piece. It's a bunch of pieces of a whole system, and they're not even. They're as I like to use the word, clunky, and they're incapable of expressing exactly what it is that someone tries to convey. You could you can't. I couldn't tell you the inner workings of a clock in enough directions without a picture. I could convey to you right now of all of these images that I've seen in the dream. This is even connecting this to the dream world and astral realms, and why it's so difficult to express anything to someone is I'm trying to take images and feelings and ideas and collapse them into these sounds, this script, this message. And even if I could give you an image of these places, it still wouldn't have you wouldn't be able to authenticate it with the feeling of it. It's just like you're out there and staring off into the distance, and you see the sunset and the ocean is there, and you take a picture, and then you're like, where did that whole experience go? This is nothing like I remember. Yeah, I mean, we get into what it does, within containing that whole experience into four walls of the frame of a picture, but it also you lose the entire identity of the experience. And if an experience can have an identity, it's kind of in the sense of it's a fully immersive reality construct. It's the air, the breeze, the smell, the sound, the heat, and you're going through like a photo album. You're going through a set of pictures, and it can never capture that. And in language, it does. It's exactly the same. It's a very similar way that we have to go about attempting to use it, though. We have to attempt it. It has to be. the directions and the challenges and the we have to make use of what we have here at our disposal. And this is why people like to, try to simplify things. Oh, the language is just too cumbersome, so let's key this into gematria and numbers. Let's make it easier. Everything has a number, but numbers become numbing. If anybody doesn't know that, that's the root for the word number, numb, because that's exactly what they do. They make something numb. It takes away all the flavor of something. It does more to compartmentalize, but it also makes things more simple. It's easy as 1, 2, 3. Put these things into this. It's a process of ordering something. But even then, we've found ourselves, but we need to break it down even more. Okay, true or false? We just on or off. And even that can't quite do it. So we're left here in the expanse of the outback, the totality of consciousness, the totality of your experience. We try to navigate this. And getting into creating, and what this has to do with being created, or being a creation, or being a creator and doing the creating, because it simultaneously exists. And how do we funnel that into magic and using language to create? They say, speak it into existence. And oftentimes we find that fails, because what we think happened isn't really what happened. The way we went about getting the results we wanted, we believe, was because we used language. And as I've always said, this is not true. In the beginning was not the word. Yeah, the beginning, when someone wrote it down in the Bible, well, somebody had to have an imagination prior to that. The true tones and vibrations were here well before, already established prior to the construct and limitations of what language is. People get what they want, using abracadabra. People get what they want through speaking and self-affirmation, but that becomes frequency and amplitude modulation of something. But underneath all of that is still the image and the feeling inside of what you require. You want a new boat? That was my dream boat. That's exactly what I wanted. And all I had to do was tell myself I wanted that boat. Well, what that was doing was giving you a reminder to, once again, implant that image back into your consciousness and your head until it took form, until it took shape in what some people would call the fifth dimension, or it spoke to the higher self, as others will say. No matter what you call it or how it, the process is still the same. The outcome is still the result of the image and the feeling, not the words themselves. They do have their place, and they do have their value to a degree. But the words themselves, it's not doing it. And they're not. You can prove this to yourself by going to if you went to a different country that doesn't speak your language. Now, there would be a very confusing thing. You wanted a car, and you kept saying, you walked in somewhere, you tried to explain to somebody that you want a car, but you're using a different language. You're probably not going to get that. But if you wanted that car and you were using the real source of magic, the way that you might acquire that automobile would be because of the imaging in your head, in your consciousness, in the overmind, in the sending this information packet to the creative force that is. And it's not even a force, it's a power. I don't know why they call it a force, but it's 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 always there. It's omnipotent, omnipresent. It's always occurring. It's always morphing, always changing. The fluidity of what you desire and the receiving of these things and these in this realm is predicated on your capacity to image something. Imagination. What more can I say about language? Is I get back to a talk I did maybe 9 months ago about language as a cultural operating system. And that's truly what it is. It can be so expressive, but it's so restraining. That's the conundrum. That's the paradox of language. And so if we hope to use this inadequate tool, what we need to do is tune it correctly. What we need to do is charge it. We have to put energy into it. It's just saying, see, we live in a culture that has allowed people just to say the right words that will, then it's called, you trigger someone, or in the past it would have been called marketing. So you'd plant marketing seeds, and then you would walk through that checkout aisle at the grocery store, and you'd impulse buy something there. These types of things are you walk into somewhere and someone sells you something just by using the right words. And so we've become so inorganic to the whole thing. We've just become a mindless drones of consuming, that we respond to words like Pavlov's dogs, or just ring the bell and salivates. But to authenticate and to actually produce a higher form of I guess you'd use a higher form of magic, of control, not even control, but manifestation, if people like to use that word, is putting something true behind it, underneath it, inside of it, to use your vocal cords to resonate something, and it gets packaged inside of a word, but there is so much more to that word. It's just in the way that we, as a carrier wave, it holds so much more information. 10 people could say the same sentence, and one person's going to sound like they really meant it, and the 9 others are just, repetitiously repeating, just say this. No, but say it like you mean it. And that in and of itself is trying to teach people to be themselves, is the most hilarious concept. We've been pulled away from our true selves since we were birthed. Alan Watts talks about it in a way of, you teach a child, you watch a child to come out the womb and stand up, start walking, they're dancing, and all of a sudden at 5 years old, you send them off to dance school. It's like they forgot how to dance. There's nothing real about it. It takes them 20 years before they can actually express themselves again, because they've been so a straitjacket has been put on them, a forming agent, a cast has been put on their movement, and this is how you dance, it's said. Yet when they came out the womb, they already knew. They were already dancing. They were already doing the damn thing. So how can we find ourselves getting back to that syrup, that sauce, that source, that gravy of consciousness, the soup that matrix, the real one, the organic matrix that we all lived inside of, that we still are inside of. But how do we get back to that? Even though we still have these sub matrices that are always occurring, and as I point out quite clearly here, is that the first and most crippling of the matrices, and the overarching one, is language. How do we use this language in a way to communicate to the organic matrix? Is there a way to do that? Is there a way to... I think so, and I think I've kind of covered that in having a sense of how do you connect what's in your mind and your being, and using your voice as a carrier wave rather than just an empty, hollow, tinny type delivery system for, just get yourself some bio-survival chips by saying the right words, and hit the button, say the right word, and get your bio-survival tokens. Because underneath this biological unit that we see as our body, there's something that exists prior to the body even. It's what you were before you jumped into this thing, and where you'll be when you jump out of it, just as you can find yourself having an out-of-body experience, getting into these other places. And how do things work and manifest there? Well, much differently, because it's not predicated upon language. And you can notice right there and see that language isn't a necessity. In fact, depending on what realms you're in and where you're at, some you might talk, most you don't. It's telekinesis. And sometimes that telekinesis is done in English, and other times that telekinesis is just done in pictures and forms, and have a feeling and an idea. So, have a beautiful night, y'all. We'll talk soon.